Councillor Russell Perrin, leader of Harlow Council. Last time we spoke about the regeneration of the town centre, which seems to be ongoing. It's going. It's green light. We're seeing things go on, right? So it's great to repair the town centre, but at the same time, can you repair the rest of the town? Meaning housing repairs. Can you do all these things, or are there limitations?
There's always limits to things that we can do, but there are certain things that we won't accept as administration. And one of the things is poor quality housing that some people have had to put up with. It's no secret there are a number of houses in the town that have got temporary roofing repairs, some houses that have got severe leaks, the stock's old. But one of the things that I've said when we come into administration is we need to get that reform. This hasn't just happened in the last year to 18 months. This has been a systemic problem that's been mounting up over decades. And there are certain things that we won't accept as administration and we're working on. Now, to the man and woman on the street, it might appear as very little's happening, but it takes time to make those system changes. I'm quite happy to talk to you about some of the changes that we're making, some of the things we should be seeing happening fairly soon.
Yeah, please do. What's happening?
So, for example, with the temporary roofing situation, one of the things that we've been working on is a plan to get those roofs redone. So, in the old plans, there was only enough money set aside to repair 30 roofs a year. We've completely restructured the capital programme, so we're actually going to tackle all 59 of those roofs that are temporary at the moment. And we've got a plan where we're using local contractors outside of our HTS company to accelerate that programme. And so we're confident by February, March next year, all of the temporary roofs that exist at the moment will be completely repaired. And I'm seeing a weekly report as a leader, seeing that number coming down. So I believe 17, as I sit here now and talk to you, but I stand to be corrected, are already underway of those 59, and they're chunking those numbers down week by week, because having a temporary roof is not an acceptable situation. And that's something that I've made very clear.
And this isn't directly related to that, but things like void properties, people live in different streets and they say, the house has been empty for years. Yeah. What's going on there, Russell?
Well, exactly. Well, when we came into power, there were a number of voids was on the rise. And there's a whole raft of things to do with housing that haven't been right for a long time. And you're absolutely right. We've got voids all over the place. So we've tasked the housing team with actually coming up with a plan to reduce those voids, because, as you say, we've got people on our waiting list that are waiting for these homes. But one of the things that we've also got to change as well as a council, and it's one thing my administration is really, really keen to do, is we've got a waiting list, which is really, really quite large. It's not new, we've inherited that. But that's why we've got a really ambitious council house building programme. And you've seen a number of the plans, and we've got staple tile, we've got Arkwrights. You've seen many of these plans coming through to address that side of it. But the other side of the coin is the existing housing stock, which has been in a state of disrepair for some time. And that's not going to change overnight. So what we've turned around and said is we're prioritising. The minimum expectation is the house will be warm, dry. That's the minimum expectation I think anyone should expect from a house. And I say this to anybody listening to this interview that's sitting in a house that isn't of that description. We are on our way. We're working on that programme. And I think it's morally reprehensible that anybody should have to live in a house where there's water coming through the roof, or they don't have a roof at all. So this administration is very keenly focused on getting that sorted, and that's what I've tasked the housing team to get sorted, and they've already started to chunk down on that plan.
And that brings into the subject of mould as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, we've changed the way that, only in the last couple of weeks, we've changed the way that's being dealt with. So in the past, if you'd reported mould, the council might have sent you a leaflet explaining what you could do as a tenant to reduce the mould in your home, maybe change your lifestyle. That stopped. Somebody will send an inspector out to look at the situation and to deal with that firsthand. So we're completely changing the way we're dealing with these things. I can't sit here and say to you there aren't houses out there without mould. That would be a lie. They are. But we're dealing with, as I say, decades worth of decline and underinvestment in the housing stock. My job, and this administration's job, and that's what we set about when we came into power, is to deal with that.
these things cost money. When it comes to money, when we're reporting on council and cabinet meetings, something comes with what Labour say about budgets, what the Conservatives say about budgets. Who's right? And talk about overspends and things like that, and there's a lot going on, isn't there? It's hard for the the man on the street to understand.
There's, without going into electron council finance, which is quite long and tedious, and it's taken me a decade's worth of learning to deal with it. But essentially, you've got two sources, or three main sources of income revenue. You've got your housing revenue account, which looks after all the council homes. That's ring fenced, and that is what we have to repair and maintain the housing stock. That's under pressure. You've got our general fund, which you can think about as our current account, which is where things like your council tax comes into, and we pay for all of the services that you see, so like Pets Corner and the museum, etc. Now, that has been under some strain. And then you've got one-off grant funding from government. So when people see things like the town centre being regenerated, that's because my administration and the officer team that work with them have been very successful at writing the bids to get that money in to regenerate our town centre, so the town centre's fund. So those are the three pools of money. Now, when people see the town centre being regenerated, they naturally think, well, why is the housing stock not being spent, money being spent on it? It's because the money is designed and purposed for a completely different thing. Now, what I've said to the officer team in the housing department is I want the modelling around the financing of that redone, because I'm quite prepared as a council, and my administration is quite prepared to borrow money to make sure that people are living in decent housing accommodation, because what the tendency has been over the past is to try and work within an ever diminishing envelope. And if it means that we have to borrow money for longer into the future, but make sure that we secure housing stock that's fit for people to live in now, then that's a decision we're prepared to take. But we need to make sure that whatever borrowing we do is sustainable, so we're not building up a problem for the future.
We're talking about housing, and there's the map of Harlow behind you. But if I put a story about housing, people are going to talk about the housing, the waiting list for, the 4,000 people. Is it as many as people as that?
Yeah.
How do you solve a problem? I'll probably keep asking this month in, month out, but I'll see what happens. What would be an acceptable figure?
I don't think there is, because I think housing is a national-wide problem, and I think if I managed to come up with 5,000 new homes, I'd suddenly have a waiting list of 5,000 again. But all I can do is have pushed the council and our administration to a position where we are building more homes than we have done in the past, and that's exactly what we are doing. We're building more council homes now than we have done in the past 30 years. So whether that will be the complete solution, I think it's a national-wide issue. But where we've had the money, or where we've had the ability or the scope to do it, we have. So over Staple Tie, for example, we've had Section 106 money, which we've been able to use to buy up the brownfield site off of Parnell Road, and we're going to get council homes on there. Over at Arkwright's, we've got the old dilapidated garage block. We're able to redevelop that. We've got the funds and the ability to do it, so we're going to put council homes. So wherever we can, we are. But we're making sure that we keep local residents also informed and part of the process, because what we don't want to do is build lots of homes but adversely affect the lifestyle of the people currently living there. So we have to balance the two things off, and we've made that very clear.
I'm sure there was a report a few years ago regarding, you mentioned the garages, and people who want, walk or jog around Harlow will see those red garages and thinking, they've seen better days. And the under occupancy, I think Mark Wilkinson had a report under occupancy. So is there an opportunity for nearly all those garage sites, from Catherine's to Potter Street, to maybe use better for council homes?
Well, some of those garage sites actually are used and used really well, and they do form a vital source of income to the council. But where some have fallen into complete disrepair, or they weren't being used, they have been cleared and they've been redeveloped. So I'm thinking in the top of my head, there are some over at Hayling Hill, for example, the back there, they've just been cleared away, and new parking bays have been put in. Over at Moorfields, for example, a couple of years ago, they were perfectly fine and could be resurfaceable, and they're rented out. And there are some also around Freshwaters the same. So it really is horses for courses. Where they're not fit for purpose and people don't want them, there's an opportunity. So we had that at Arkwright's. But where they are useful and they can be regenerated, we're doing that.
And just a couple of more questions. Is that you talk about whatever you're doing in the council, we're talking about housing, we're talking about staff to do housing, but there's a vibe, or maybe there's a direct statement on Thursday from the acting chief executive that you may not be able to replace staff, and so how are you going to deal with that?
Well, one of the things that is really important to do is to look at all potential avenues for efficiency, but also for income generation. It's not just about cut. It's about what can we do differently and better. So there are some departments where we've had vacancies for 4, 5, 6 years. Why do we build that into the budget if we're not going to replace them? That puts an undue pressure. Maybe there's a better way of working. Maybe we can share that resource with another authority. So we've done that in the past with audit function. You get a saving. So why do we keep budgeting for something that we can't do? Let's do it differently. So that's really the rationale behind that. In terms of, it's been mentioned about the overspend. I think we need to address that. The £1.2 million overspend. There's very much a political game being played with that. That £1.2 million overspend is not an overspend because it was set aside deliberately to deal with the after effects of the pandemic. It was called the COVID Recovery Reserve, which the previous Labour administration had set aside 1.2 million. In fact, when we were in opposition, we argued it could probably have been a bit higher, and we showed how we could do that. But the fact of the matter is you put that money aside to be used for a reason and not to just sit there and just look pretty. And when the time came, we needed to use that, and we acknowledged that the money had been set aside by the previous administration, and it's been used precisely because of the impact of the COVID pandemic, where we had a fall in the car parking, where we had an increase in some rates, where we've had to support local businesses. That's what that money is used for. So it's not an overspend on the day-to-day running of the council. In fact, had we not had that pandemic, if we took those additional pressures away, we would actually have come in with a slight underspend. So it's quite disingenuous to talk about a £1.2 million overspend when you've actually created a reserve as a Labour administration to deal with those after effects. We agreed with that reserve being created, and actually now we're in administration, we've actually used it for the purpose it was intended. Half the problem with the council finances under the previous administration was always padding the reserves needlessly well above their minimum threshold. And that's why I was able to give everybody one of the largest council tax cuts in history last year at a point where cost of living crisis was starting to bite.
And finally, a new chief executive starts quite soon, yes. I believe. You must be pleased with the appointment of Andrew Bramage.
He's a very competent man.
Yeah, and a man embedded in regeneration, isn't he? In from way back with the Renaissance, etc. So you're very pleased.
Absolutely. Me and the panel decided unanimously that he was the best candidate for the job, because even though Andrew's got a very long and distinguished history of regeneration projects, massive regeneration projects, which are obviously of value to this authority, what comes with that, he's had past experience as a chief executive, and the skills that he's got in managing teams and actually taking people with him to improve institutions just shone out for us. And Andrew is going to be a vital asset to this council in driving forward improvements in housing, which we talked about tonight, but also driving forward the regeneration agenda.